Welcome everybody. We're so excited that you're here. My name is Jeremy Daniel. I'm the Vice President of Training for the Color Code. I'm a yellow, very yellow, which is probably why I started the webinar in live mode instead of practice mode, but I'm like 82% yellow, very, very yellow. And I'm here with Dr. Leroy Chow and Ms. Jamie Sunkel. Leroy is a blue. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And Jamie is a fellow yellow. They're from OneOrbit. And actually what I'd like to do, let's just jump right in. I'd love to introduce Dr. Leroy Chow. He has been, he's a retired NASA astronaut, 15 years at NASA. He is the former commander of the International Space Station. He spent over 200 days in space, if you can believe that. For all of us who dreamed about going to space and space camp and things like that as kids, that's just like mind-blowing. So we're so excited to hear some of your stories. And then Jamie Sunkel is a space educator, certified science geek for sure. Jamie's always been fun, a lot of fun to talk to because she's just so into science. We call them the space peeps, right? So,
Yep.
So Jamie's a NASA certified master science teacher and co-founder of OneOrbit. And so we're gonna hear from both Dr. Leroy Chow and Ms. Jamie Sunkel as we get into this. So Dr. Chow, let me just turn this over to you. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about your story, I'm sure we would all love to hear it.
You bet. All right. Thanks, Jeremy. Well, welcome everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you all today. As you heard, my name is Leroy Chow and I'm an astronaut. And what I'd like to do today is first, I'm going to start off with a short PowerPoint, kind of introduce myself, share a glimpse of some of my adventures in space together. I'm going to talk a little bit about, then I'll stop sharing the PowerPoint and I will go back to just this presentation mode here. And I'll talk a little bit about OneOrbit and what Jamie and I are doing. I'll talk a little bit about our programs and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how we make tomorrow better than today through using parallels and differences between long duration spaceflight and the situation we all find ourselves in with this semi-isolation and the pandemic. Then I'm going to introduce Jamie and I'm going to have her talk a little more in depth on how we use the color code and a little more in depth in our workshops and how that works and just how excited we are to have found the color code and to be using it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Oh, host disabled screen sharing. You're going to have to enable me here, Jeremy.
Let's do that. I'm going to just make you a host. How about that?
Okay, that'll work. All right, I'll go ahead and share.
Perfect.
Ah, perfect. Got it. Okay, so now we should be seeing my screen. And as I said before, my name is Leroy Chow. I'm a former NASA astronaut and International Space Station commander. Over my 15-year NASA career, I did get to fly 4 times into space. My first 3 missions were aboard space shuttles, and then my 4th mission, I trained with the Russians. We launched aboard a Russian rocket out of the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, and we flew to the International Space Station where I served as the commander and NASA science officer during Expedition 10, which was a 6.5-month flight. I can't remember a time when I wasn't fascinated with flying and rockets. Even when I was very young, I'd look at picture books of airplanes, and as I got a little older, I'd memorize how fast they could fly and how high they could fly. I grew up during the 1960s, during the very beginning of the space race, so when rockets came around, I got instantly interested in those as well. So I was 8 years old when we landed on the moon with Apollo 11. And I remember like it was yesterday, even though now we're coming up on almost 51 years ago. And so first I'd like to start with just a short video that NASA created to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, just to get everyone's juices flowing and get us ready for today's presentation.
15 seconds, guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engines running. We have a liftoff. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Arrow. We drift into the right.
Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon. On this July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Oh, that looks beautiful, baby. It has a such beauty all its own. It's like under the high desert of the United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here. Beautiful, beautiful. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here. Magnificent desolation. Tranquility Base, Houston. Guidance recommendation is pinged, and you're cleared for takeoff. Roger, understand. We're number one on the runway. 7, 6, 5, position on ascent. Very smooth. Very quiet ride. Apollo 11, this is Hornet, over. This is Apollo 11, your loud and clear. Our position 1330.
Wow, hard to believe that was just a little over 50 years ago. And like I said, that's what inspired me to want to become an astronaut myself. I was also always interested in technical things, so it was natural for me to pursue a course in engineering. And so I earned 3 degrees in chemical engineering. And after I had the required amount of work experience, I went ahead and put my application into NASA. And I was fortunate enough to be asked to interview and then actually to get selected. And this was a very exciting time, as you can imagine. Obviously, a little while ago. I think we're coming up on 30 years and I don't know, maybe 20 pounds ago, but it was a very exciting time. I packed up my things from California and moved down to Houston, which is where I still live today. 4 years after arriving at NASA, I did get my first chance to fly up into space aboard Space Shuttle Columbia. And just by coincidence, we were flying on the 25th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission. Our mission was a 2-week mission and spanned the entire mission of Apollo 11. During that anniversary, we were flying on Columbia, which was the namesake of the command module of Apollo 11. And many of us flying on board for our first time in space, like me, were inspired by that Apollo 11 landing. So that was kind of a neat coincidence for us to be flying on the 25th anniversary. And then just last year, of course, we passed the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 and the 25th anniversary of our first mission. During my missions in space, I got to do a lot of different interesting work. I got to do research work, of course, in different areas of science. I got to do spacewalks. I did 6 spacewalks in American spacesuits and in Russian spacesuits, all in support of building the International Space Station. So I'm pretty proud of actually having turned wrenches and attached pieces onto the station myself. And then I started training for my space station mission. So no longer would I be training for and flying a 2-week shuttle mission. Now I was going to go live up in space in a series of tin cans for over half a year. So that was a big commitment and 3.5 years worth of training. Had to do a lot of things, spent a lot of time in Russia because Russia is the other major partner in the International Space Station program. Learned the Russian language, got to know the cosmonauts and their mission controllers very well. So like I said, over the course of 3.5 years, spent roughly 50% of my time in Star City outside of Moscow, 1 month there, 1 month back in Houston, pretty much jet lagged the whole time. Flying aboard a Russian Soyuz spacecraft was a very interesting experience, especially after having flown aboard 3 space shuttles. Very, very different rocket, different ride. But in either case, it only takes about 9 minutes to get from the launch pad up into low Earth orbit, up to an orbital speed of about 17,500 miles an hour. Well, spaceflight really is a magical experience. It's a life-changing experience. I don't think anyone flies up into space without some pretty fundamental introspection and thinking about what it's all about. And our favorite thing to do when we're up in space is to take photographs, and we photograph the Earth. The Earth is so beautiful from space. It's hard to believe. The colors are very, very vibrant. Every part of the Earth looks different and is beautiful in its own way. So I just want to share just a few pictures of the Earth with you. This, of course, is New York City, Manhattan, showing you what's possible on a clear day with a little bit of practice. we're flying at an altitude of roughly 280 miles. And so you can see it takes a little bit of skill to be able to track your target as you release the shutter. And you have to focus, because even though we're 280 miles away, you can't just slam the lens over to infinity. It'll be blurry. And so you have to focus while you're doing all this. And by the way, you're weightless, so you better use your feet to hold on to something, or you're just going to float away from the window. But with a little bit of practice and good weather, you can get some pretty nice shots. Here's the southern tip of Florida, very beautiful part of the world. The blues and greens really jump out at you down here in South Florida and in the Bahamas, really unlike anywhere else in the world. These are glaciers in Patagonia in Argentina. Here are the Great Pyramids at Giza. You can see the two big ones pretty clearly in the middle of your screen. If you look down from the two big ones, you can see the third smaller one. And if you look to the left of the third smaller one, you can make out the outline of the Sphinx.
Very cool.
This is one of my favorites. This is Lake Nasser in Egypt in sun glint. And so I was able to take this picture when the sun was reflecting just at the right angle to reflect almost perfectly off the surface of the water into the camera lens. And this is what it really looked like out the window just for a moment. And I was able to capture this shot. Well, I'd like to thank Color Code. I mean, they really have made our programs, really enriched our programs quite a bit. Let me talk just a moment about OneOrbit before I get into the Make Tomorrow Better Than Today outline. But Jamie Sunkel and I started this company about 4 years ago. And, you know, Jamie is a NASA certified master science teacher, professional educator. And she's done a lot of other things too. I'll let her tell you about that. But she did spend almost 10 years in the classroom teaching middle school science. And what we do corporate and education programs. We do keynote speeches for conferences and your meetings. And we also have more detailed, kind of deeper dive workshops. And that's really where we use the Color Code. And I'm going to let Jamie talk mostly about that. But if you'd like to take a look at our website, here it is. Please have a look. We'd love for you to see if maybe we could fit into one of your programs, either virtually or you know, when things open up live. But just wanted to give this opportunity to talk a little bit about that. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, I think we're back. And so now I want to talk about some of the similarities and differences about long duration spaceflight and the situation we all find ourselves in. Obviously, there's some very clear parallels in that while you're aboard a space station during a long flight, you're working remotely. We have the same tools. Okay, we've got computers. We do you know, video calls like this. We do audio calls, and we also have email. And so we're able to keep in touch with the Mission Control Center, family, friends, loved ones, things like that pretty easily and pretty effectively using all those electronic means that we're all using now and have been using since sometime in early mid-March. And so some of the big differences, I also want to say some of the things that you've probably learned in your businesses is that it works best to work asynchronously, just like we do aboard the space station. So what we do aboard the station, we have a schedule for the day. We know what we're going to be doing. We have a tag up in the morning with the Mission Control Centers, just a short tag, about 15 minutes, talk about what we're going to do, any issues, any concerns, and then we get to work and we kind of, you know, throughout the day, we can call down and organize smaller, you know, conferences or conversations as needed. And then at the end of the day, we have another tag up with the Mission Control Centers, basically with the whole team, and kind of talk about what worked, what didn't work, any issues that we had, and what we're going to do tomorrow. And so you've probably learned in your own businesses that this is a very effective way to work remotely with you know, medium to large size teams, even small teams. And so that really is, you know, how it happens. Two big differences though. I knew what I was getting into, right? I knew where I was going to be, you know, launching into space. I had 3.5 years to train. I had 3.5 years to get used to the idea of being isolated and being remote and getting used to that and talking to other people who had done it and imagining what it would be like and just kind of setting my expectations. I also knew when I was coming home. I knew when it was going to end. You know, of course, there could have been a delay. Something could have happened. We could have been delayed a week, a few weeks even, or maybe even a month. But I knew by and large what time frame we were going to be coming home. In our current situation with the pandemic, of course, the onset was very quick. It was just a matter of days, it seemed, before suddenly, oh my goodness, this thing is really a lot bigger deal than we thought. And everyone's got to stay at home more or less, except for going out to buy supplies and things like that. And also the big thing is we don't know when it's going to end. And the thing that humans hate the most, no matter what color you are, is uncertainty, right? Because we prefer bad news. Even if we get bad news, that means that we know what's going to happen and we can make plans on how we're going to adjust to that. With uncertainty, you're not really sure what you're going to do, and that's what causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. And that can cause demotivation, and that's the key. You want to keep yourself and your team motivated. As a leader, especially if you're the leader of your business or your business unit, you need to keep yourself motivated, and you need to keep your team motivated. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the tools from long duration spaceflight that are applicable to our situation now. First thing is we use checklists in aviation and space flight. And, it doesn't mean that you have to write everything out, but I mean, you should have at least a mental checklist of things that you want to, keep track of and make sure that things are going the way that you want to go and you don't miss a step, right? And so that's very important. Set your expectations. Make sure your teammates, everyone involved sets their expectations correctly. We don't know when this pandemic's going to end. Frankly, we just don't know. And if you start setting false deadlines, like surely by the end of the summer we'll be out of it, surely by the fall we'll be out of it. If we get to those deadlines and we're not out of it, and you're going to get depressed. Right? It's going to be a big disappointment, a big letdown, and then you can start spiraling down into this pit of despair and demotivation. And then, of course, a demotivated person or a demotivated team is not very productive. And the key is to keep your spirits up, keep your motivation up, and all your teammates, and keep being able to work and be effective. Right? Another thing are surprises. I mean, this pandemic, like I said at the onset, was pretty quick, kind of a big surprise, especially, I found it to be a surprise how quickly we suddenly found ourselves more or less locked down. And so, you've got to be able to react to surprises, and training helps. Training helps a lot. Even if you don't train for the specific thing that happened, just the fact that you're familiar with, what you have at your disposal, your resources, you'll be able to react as effectively as possible. Let me give you a couple of examples from my space flights. On my long flight, after the first month or so of flight, suddenly we found out we were running low on food. And this was really weird. It's like, well, as it turns out, our buddies on the previous flight had gotten into our food, and somehow the accounting of what they took didn't mesh. And so we found ourselves suddenly rationing food for about 4 or 5 weeks. And so we had, no kidding, about 1,200 real calories of food a day. Of course, we did have plenty of sweets. They left us all the desserts. But maybe that's good for a kid, but not for us. So we had calories, but we were trying not to eat a bunch of sugar. And so, we each lost 5 or 10 pounds. My dad, when he was interviewed by the news media, said, I'm not sure he was joking. He said, well, he needs to lose some weight anyway. So he didn't feel too sorry for me. But anyway, so we got into that situation, and we kind of kept each other's spirits up with humor. We would go around talking about how full we were, how we couldn't eat anymore. And we encouraged the mission control centers to send jokes up, things like that. I squirreled away, I was the commander of the flight, I squirreled away some of the good food. And then I surprised my Russian crewmate with a special dinner on a special occasion as we were kind of in the middle of the rationing. And he really appreciated that. And that kind of helped buoy his spirits as well. On the other side, we had another surprise that not many people have heard about, but it's not very pleasant. So hopefully won't gross you out too much. But one night we were settling in, and suddenly there was just the most awful smell you could imagine. It's like, what is that? And so we started opening panels and looking behind panels and trying to figure out what was going on. And then we opened up a panel by the toilet system, and these big, disgusting liquid globules started coming out. And like, oh my goodness. And so what had happened is, with the toilet system, after you use the toilet, the system automatically flushes the hoses with concentrated sulfuric acid for just a few seconds, about 10 or 15 seconds. And what had happened is, after somebody used it, the pump stuck on, emptied the entire tank of concentrated sulfuric acid into the system, flooded the system, overflowed it. And so we had this disgusting concentrated sulfuric acid with what in it. and coming out into the cabin, and we didn't have any time to react. I mean, call the Mission Control Center, because if we had, they would have told us to go dig out the safety goggles and the gloves and get the vacuum cleaner ready, you know. And by that time, this stuff would have been all throughout the station. So we didn't have any time to do anything like that. We grabbed dirty laundry out of the bags, and we used our hands, and we just collected the stuff as much as we could and contained it. We could feel the acid burning our hands, the skin on our hands. We unfortunately didn't get any into our eyes or anything like that. So then after we got everything under control, cleaned up, then we called the Mission Control Center. But like I said, you've got to be ready to react to surprises. I mean, in this situation, you know, NASA tries to anticipate everything, but there are things that you just can't anticipate, and you've got to deal with emergencies or things like that and keep going. You got to keep plugging away.
Chow. How did you dispose of it? You can't leave this hanging.
No. So we have rubberized bags. No, so we have these rubberized bags that we put all the dirty laundry into and all the stuff we used to clean up the mess, tied them all off, and then, you know, those went into the trash system where we dispose of the trash eventually. With the resupply ship comes and you unpack the supplies, put the trash in the resupply ship, it undocks and burns up in the atmosphere. So it eventually all got burned up in the Earth's atmosphere as it came down at those high speeds. So yeah, so that was the most unpleasant thing that's ever happened to me in space. But, you know, you can see how things like that can be demotivating. You've got to watch for signs. If you're a leader, you need to watch for signs that your teammates might be getting demotivated. If you're having Zoom tag-ups and you see that, you know, somebody's not taking the time to groom properly or get cleaned up before getting on a Zoom call, or doesn't have any input and is not engaged, well, you know, hopefully you can have a conversation with that person offline and try to buoy their spirits and encourage them to kind of get motivated again. And some ways to do that I found in space, you know, it was really important to me to keep in touch with loved ones and friends, you know, and I did that a lot with email, but also with video calls and audio calls. And what I would do, one thing I would do would take pictures of different parts of the Earth that meant something to an individual, and then I'd email it to that person, and that really made that person happy. And in return, that friend or family member would send me some pictures and tell me some stories, and that would help me keep my spirits up.
That's such a blue thing, by the way.
I know.
It is.
I'm very cool with you, Dr. Chow.
So you have to encourage people to kind of keep their spirits up and keep in touch with those friends and loved ones, because if you start getting demotivated and depressed, like I said, you can start getting into the spiral to where you kind of stop talking to people, right? And that just makes it worse, and you spiral deeper and deeper into this depression and demotivation. So watch for signs of that in yourself and with your team. Go outside. That's what I do these days. I go out for a run every morning, and that helps me a lot. I take my dogs for walks, and getting outside, you know, that's one of the things I missed the most when I was aboard the station, was, you know, actually being in nature, you know, feeling the wind on my face, hearing birds chirp, watching squirrels run around, smelling the grass, things like that. Get outside. If you need a break, get out there just for a few minutes. You know, I'm sure most of you have already found just how refreshing that is, even in the Houston heat of the summer, to get out and do that. We didn't have that luxury on the station, but we did have the beautiful views of the Earth. So that certainly helped a lot. And remember, we're all in this together. So help each other, you know, help your neighbors, help your friends as best you can, support each other. If somebody's running low on supplies, share some of yours, you know, if you've got some extra, and, you know, just kind of, you know, we'll get through this. And like I said, set those expectations, do all these things that I talked about. And so this, you know, just a quick kind of taste of one of our programs called, you know, Make Tomorrow Better Than Today. And so that's an example of one of the kind of the keynotes that we give, although usually it's to a full PowerPoint presentation, and it's a lot, you know, about twice as long as I went through today. But we also have follow-on workshops. And so I'd like to introduce Jamie real quick. I told you a little bit about her. She's you know, a professional educator, but has become quite the entrepreneur. And she's a big yellow, I'm a big blue, but so that's why she's good at sales, right? She's probably better than me, you know, admittedly. But she's going to talk a little bit more about how we use the color code and just how excited we were to find it and to utilize it. So I'll hand it over to Jamie.
All right, thanks, Leroy. It's never easy to follow an astronaut, but I will do my best. Of course, we do this all the time, all over the world before COVID. When we started our business, OneOrbit, just over 4 years ago, Leroy and I met here in Colorado Springs. We were both working for a space nonprofit. I was doing education outreach. He was one of our key astronauts that we'd send out into schools and communities, and he would give motivational keynotes and some leadership things all over the US with this company. And so I had the privilege to work with several other astronauts, and Leroy was very, very different in his connection, in his personality, how he related to people and kids. And at the time, I had decided that I was going to go back to graduate school and I was going to be an administrator. So that was the path. I was going to get a second master's degree and leave this organization. There wasn't a lot of opportunities there. And as a yellow, I'm a yellow red, so that gives me about a 3-year time span doing anything for very long. And I had to do an internship for this graduate degree of internship of sorts. And I needed a PhD that worked within our organization to mentor me and sign off on these leadership hours and these organizational things that I was doing. So I went to Leroy and we started talking about these different ideas, and we decided that we would take those ideas to our previous organization, and they really weren't interested in hearing anything new. This is the way we ran our program for years and years, and we just want to keep it at at status quo. And so Leroy said, well, why don't we start a business on our own? Why don't we go out and do this? And so me being a yellow, I thought, well, okay, let's do it. And so 4 years ago, we leaped in. Leroy had already been speaking professionally all over the world, but we expanded the company to have education programs, to have trainings, to have leadership. And we were looking for something to add as far as the personality assessment, self-awareness, to bring in and develop a training model. And as a teacher, we did this for years and years, lots of professional development. If you've worked in education, you know that you spend a lot of time in just another workshop where you kind of roll your eyes and, you bring your Starbucks in and you're like, yeah, whatever, this is, the same old. But I came across the color code and immediately fell in love with it, did the initial test. I sent it over to Leroy, and he'll tell you at NASA, they did a lot of different personality, Myers-Briggs and the whole run of it, because you have to put the right personalities on a crew, or the Russians have found, and I'll have Leroy tell a couple stories a little bit later about what happens when you get the wrong 2 types of personalities on board to make all the decisions. And so I found this and I loved it. I was really excited. And so I sent it over to Leroy thinking that he was going to, hate it. He's a blue perfectionist engineer. And so when I sent it to him, Leroy, how did you feel about this program? The color
Oh, it was
code?
great. I loved it. And one of several things I like about it, but Myers-Briggs, of course, we did that, and several others. And, of course, it's kind of interesting when you're doing it, but then as soon as I walked out, I forgot what all those letters meant. And I forgot what my letters were, frankly. And so it was kind of not very useful on a practical scale, So what I love about the color code is it's simple. It's easy to remember, once you see what the colors mean, you remember them forever. And it's core motivation, right? And when you're under stress, when you're in an emergency situation, you revert back to your core, what you are, right? I mean, it's not learned behavior anymore. I mean, it is. You can train yourself to do things, but or get trained, but your instinct is to go back to your core.
So we found the color code, fell in love with it. I met Jeremy. We did the trainings. We got our full personality assessment, and it really helped us with our building a company. I mean, you start with an idea, and like I said, Leroy had been doing these types of things, but never to the extent that we wanted to build. So it was really such a great tool for starting our business to be able to communicate with one another. Like I said, Leroy is 50% blue. He's about half-ish red. He's got a little bit of yellow in there and a little bit of white. And for me, I'm yellow. red, lot of red, just a little bit of blue, and a little bit of white. So we implemented this program into our leadership training, and every time we've delivered the program, students have fallen in love with it. Our corporate audience, everyone just loves it. They always go back to it. We have a program at Rice University for high school students, and we ran the pilot program last summer. We were supposed to do 4 weeks of it this summer here in Houston, but they launched balloon satellites, they launched rockets, they did all of these amazing science projects. And when they were filling out the top 3 things that they loved most about the program, the color code was always in there on the impact that it had on building their crews and teams and how they communicated. So the other reason why we love it so much is just the audience that you can reach with it. And now that we're all working from home and working remotely, that's where we developed this program, Make Tomorrow Better Than Today. So we have Leroy's stories from space and the motivation side. We bring in our color code program for self-awareness. And then we put a little bit of a different twist on it. And Jeremy and I have talked about it, where we bring in people from NASA and the space community that we see as different colors. So for example, Leroy, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about Buzz Aldrin and Elon Musk and where they're at and where you think they're at, Jeremy, as well. And Leroy's met and worked with both of those guys, and we've all heard of them. So Leroy, where would you put them on our...
Well, I would say those guys are, if not completely red, almost completely red.
Super red,
and they're both interesting people. Buzz was one of my childhood heroes, walking on the moon. You heard his voice and saw him in that video. But he's in transmit mode. I'm going to tell you what I need from you. He's not really listening to what you're saying so much. Elon Musk, obviously very driven person. And arguably without this drive, he would not have built SpaceX and building SpaceX into what it is, and Tesla Motors and his other companies, the Starlink, the satellite internet. It takes somebody that's really wants to get the mission done and has a lot of drive. Your Reds, Steve Jobs was undoubtedly a Red to get the job done.
Yeah, so that's our twist is bringing the exploration side to the training and to the programs. And I just love working with Jeremy. We're talking about expanding that and partnering on some new things with the color code. And so just really exciting. Like Leroy said earlier, we don't exactly know how long these types of programs are how long we're going to be doing Zoom keynotes and trainings like this. And so we're preparing for the unknown and developing new programs all the time. So with that, I wanted to hand it back over to Jeremy to talk to Leroy and me about our blue yellow and what it was like at NASA being a blue when the mission was so important. We know our Reds focus on the mission, and then you have Leroy, also a Chinese American. And when we identify countries, China's a red country, and how that all intertwined to how he was able to work and be successful.
Very cool. Well, this is like super fun for me, and I appreciate your insights, Jamie, and Dr. Chow, your insights. So I would love to open up the chat a little more too. So you guys, if you are watching this live and you're chatting here, please let us know, like, what questions would you like to ask the OneOrbit team, the color code space peeps? What would you like to know about NASA or about what they do or personality styles? I certainly have some questions, but maybe real quick, just if you're watching and you're in the chat, let us know what you think so far. Just give us a yay if you are appreciating what's happening here. Let us know. Again, if you have questions, let us know. So I just want to hear from you guys real quick and see what's going through your minds. So Cami said she's loving it. Sandy Sandy Logan said, so far loving it. Lisa, did Leroy ever see? Okay, all right, here we go. I knew this was coming. I thought I was going to be the one to ask this question but Lisa Farrell from Las Vegas is asking this question for us. So Leroy, did you see, oh wait, you know what? Okay, so Lisa, let me just frame this. Let's do this properly so we can get a true answer. Lisa is asking, I don't want you to answer yet, but she's asking, did Leroy ever see extraterrestrials in his travels? So I'm sure that information is classified. So Dr. Chow, if you've seen less than 5 extraterrestrials, blink once. And if you've seen more than 5 extraterrestrials, blink twice. All right. I think we got the official answer there. Okay, but would you like to comment on that question, Dr. Chow?
Sure. No, I didn't see any extraterrestrials. Saw some weird things from space, but they were all explained as either, human-made or natural phenomenon. But I do very much believe that there's other life in the universe. I think there's intelligent life all over the universe. I mean, just think about how vast our own galaxy is and beyond, all the galaxies beyond our galaxy. I mean, it'd be the height of arrogance to think that we are the only intelligent beings in this entire universe. So I think there's intelligence life everywhere, but I don't believe we've been visited. I think we're so far apart, we will never, ever, ever find each other. I mean, we could be hundreds of millions or even more light years apart.
Got it. All right. Yeah, good point. Great point. Okay, Megan said, so cool. Dorothy said, great. So let's see.
Leroy, can you talk a little bit about what happened with the Russians when
that was it.
crew went bad?
What, when the Russians did what?
The Russians on Mir?
Which part? What do you mean?
When they didn't look at interpersonal skills when they sent crews
Oh,
up.
actually, that was earlier than Mir. That was on the stations.
Mir, okay.
That was on the Salyut stations, Russia's first stations. They were operating in the 70s and part of the 80s, but mostly the 70s. And what happened was, the Russians didn't pay attention to putting the right people together. They had the attitude, well, that the Americans had when we started ISS, and the Russians quickly convinced us otherwise, that, well, our people are all professionals and anyone can work with anyone. Well, that's true on a 2-week shuttle mission, but not on a 6-month flight, okay? And so in the early days of the Russian program, where they just threw people up together, they were having some pretty serious problems. And in at least 2 cases, they had to end missions early because the crews were literally ready to kill each other. And so it was not unusual sometimes for crew members to go for a week in space without speaking to each other because the tension had built up so high. And that just kind of underscores the importance of putting the right people together, the right mix of people together.
And that happens all the time, right? So it's amazing that certainly on such a high level, when you're talking about space exploration and living aboard the International Space Station, it's pretty remarkable that no thought was given to that idea, but certainly understandable. These are folks that have had years and years of training, obviously, and so just thinking that, hey, they'll be able to work out whatever. It seems like a logical thought, but I mean, goodness, as human beings, we have all kinds of conflicts and differences, and those little quirks and nuances multiplied over 6 months, multiplied by the fact that you're isolated in space, multiplied by the fact that everything is different. Dr. Chow, you talked about, anxiety levels being high right now in people. I've talked to a lot of people who are experiencing those kinds of things because just certain assurances and the way that the world works aren't working right now. And so
it's the uncertainty, yeah, right.
You take all of those things, all of those factors, and you put them into a floating space station over the course of 6 months. And sure, it's very understandable that those kinds of things would be real, legitimate issues. And too bad. I mean, what a shame that a mission would have to be cut short because of those kinds of things. But lots of teams are impacted by that on a regular basis. And I was actually teaching at Clemson a couple of weeks ago, a virtual program with Clemson a couple of weeks ago. And I just asked the question, I'd be curious to ask this question here of our participants. So if you're participating and you can chat, let me know what you think on this. I would love to know how many of you have ever worked on a really dysfunctional team, and tell me what that was like, what your experience was like. Have you ever worked on a really, really dysfunctional team, and what was life like for you? Okay, so we'll start with that. I'll read a couple of responses here, and then we'll do it a little bit differently. By the way,
I can tell you my story, Jeremy, and then while we're getting, as a yellow, I've done a lot of different things, and in my mid-20s, I was the curator of a classic car museum. So I worked for the founder of the Discovery Channel. It was an American classic car museum. We had $20 million worth of these amazing cars out in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. Literally, the town had 25 people in it.
oh,
And
wow.
so they brought people.
A lot of really amazing classic cars. Okay.
So you have a billionaire building this resort out, and I was in the museum. The museum was fantastic, but throughout the resort, they just kind of picked people for different jobs. So I had an education background, and they said, well, you have the most education here, so you're gonna be the curator of this museum. Now, I didn't know much about cars. So my red side kicked in. I just spent studying, learning, I started judging car shows. I mean, I just spent so much time educating myself on classic cars. Well, my teammates did not want to do any of that. They didn't care. It was a cake job. It was easy. Why are you doing this? What? And so my first evaluation, my boss brought me in, and she said to me, she said, Jamie, your teammates, they really don't like you. And you say that to yellow.
Sorry. Strong.
And I said, and she said, they can feel how your intenseness is making them feel uncomfortable. So you need to tone it down. And I was like, I was like, okay, well, fine. So at that time, I spent the next 6 weeks at work watching YouTube videos and watching nothing but taser videos. And not only did I only watch taser videos, I shared it with all of my teammates and said, come see this, totally goofed off just to see.
Taser videos like people getting tased, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, just people getting tased on YouTube. I don't know why that was my, this was like 2006, 2007. That was, YouTube was like the new thing to watch on YouTube. So I that's what I did. And so
very yellow thing, right? Like, which
that's
people getting tased on YouTube.
people, I don't know why that was. I can't tell you. When you're in your 20s, you can't always be held accountable for all your decision making. But my boss brought me back in, and she said, man, you've really been improving on your performance, and things are really much better. And so I resigned like the next week, and just wasn't the right fit. But that was my dysfunctional.
Yeah, no, that's a really great story. Really great story. And a couple things stand out to me, like color code wise. So first of all, if you knew somebody's color code, like knowing that you're a yellow, if I were to tell you that your coworkers, your team just really didn't like you, that would be like the very worst thing that I could say to a yellow, honestly. A red might just, like imagine saying that to Buzz Aldrin or something like that.
Right.
Your response would be, well, they can get a life. I don't care. But like as a yellow, that's devastating because we actually want those social connections, and we want to know that, even if we're not maybe best friends, that we have rapport with people, that people like us, that we have like a fluid relationship. And so to say something like nobody likes you, that would be that's like that would be the last thing that I would say to a yellow, especially like that. But the second thing that stands out to me is I'm very impressed by the fact that that there's some character that we're seeing here in young Jamie in her 20s, where at the point where you're watching taser videos on YouTube all day and you're getting complimented by your performance from your boss, you realize that there was a disconnect, right? And that wasn't real, and you had the integrity to say, okay, this isn't for me. Whereas a lot of people would be like, okay, great, you're going to pay me to watch YouTube videos all day and tell me that I'm doing a great job for doing this and letting everybody just kind of goof off and do whatever they want. A lot of people would do that. They would just gladly accept that paycheck. So That's not the kind of person that even young Jamie Songwell. That's super cool. Okay, so all right, I'm just reading through some comments here. So, by the way, Jennifer Bergdorf is saying that she's super geeked out by the webinar, which is great. I love it. Okay, looking forward to hearing some more examples. Okay. We're talking about the blinks. Okay, here's one. Here's a question, I think. Okay, I'm a red and spent 22 years as a Navy nurse. I now teach nursing school and I'm teaching a critical thinking class. I really want to help my students to start working better in groups and with others as they join the nursing profession. How can I help them assimilate all of the different colors in their new profession? So Jamie, let's go back maybe to your example of some of the youth programs that you've conducted. I've done a lot of workshops and things with youth as well. You know, you mentioned that even though you're doing these like amazing science experiments, that a lot of times just the color code stuff stood out. So how would you respond to that question?
How to, you know, when we do this, we talk to our participants, and I know you do this as well, but everyone is a little bit different. You know, we are all a mix of all these colors, and we know that. Of course, I would try to quickly identify the reds in the group, and in my opinion, I wouldn't put them all together depending on what you're doing. I mean, it also depends on the task. So when we started grouping these students in aerospace, we really did it 25-20. You know, we tried to mix them the best we could, so we had the 4 different colors and the mix, and really focused on their communication skills instead of doing all one color. I know for us, for Leroy and myself, blues and yellows work really well together. We've had our fair share of conflicts. He's I shouldn't say just confrontation. I mean, more as a yellow, I want to just step out when it's not fun, and I don't want to continue to communicate. I don't want to continue to work the problem. But within our company and within our own business, that's not an option, or we don't feed our families, right? So, you know, that's really about knowing to the best of your ability and using the color code to identify who you're working with.
Dr. Shah, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think a lot of people, and especially the whites, right, really want to avoid conflict and confrontation. But one of the things we teach especially in our workshops, and we touch on it in our keynotes, is that it's important to not avoid conflict. I mean, you don't try to get into a conflict, but if there's an issue with the team or with a team member, you've got to meet it head on and fix it, you know, or resolve it. Otherwise, it just festers and gets worse and worse. The next thing you know, everything becomes more dysfunctional. People stop communicating. And so, you know, conflict is part of life. And even though most of us don't particularly like it necessarily, it's necessary to, you know, try to nip that in the bud and do it head on. And that's what we've learned to do. And that's what we try to teach others as well.
And Leroy, how did you work through that with the bureaucracy of NASA?
That's a tough one, because it's you know, the NASA that you saw in the video is not the NASA of today, or even the NASA of the space shuttle era. And so there's a lot more bureaucracy, and it kind of keeps getting bigger and bigger. And it is very frustrating. Not can be, it is very frustrating if you're trying to get something done. So you definitely feel like you're swimming against the tide. It's easy to try to give up, or you're just to give in. But really, it's just trying to control what you can control, and then influencing, you know, others to you know, try to change that mindset. At least, you know, you've got to realize you can only do what you can do. You can only control this piece of the pie, and so, you know, you do what you can to influence the other parts.
I think that's great. I think those are all great points. And with color code, I think that one of the reasons that we have such great success in utilizing this in organizations, and Dr. Chow and Jamie, you probably experienced the same kind of thing, is as people are on these teams, and we'll come back to some of the comments on, you know, what being on maybe a dysfunctional team was like. I'm seeing a lot of these pop up. I think what the color code does is it gives you a framework for understanding what's actually happening, and it gives you some vocabulary that you can use. So going back to this question on working with students, it's the same thing as working with adults. If you can understand what somebody's motive is, if you understand that reds are motivated by power and blues are motivated by intimacy and whites by peace and yellows by fun, and you know what that means, and you understand what people's emotional needs and wants are, all of a sudden it starts to kind of demystify these relationships, where you can look at somebody and say, okay, like we disagree on this issue, and maybe this is how you're looking at it from your red perspective, and here's how I'm looking at it from my yellow perspective, and we can figure that out without taking it personally. And so having that framework and having that vocabulary, I think is just so important as you're moving from a place where, you know, maybe your team is good but not great, and you're trying to kind of move up to greatness and continue on that path. You have to have a way of being able to talk about things in a way that's not personal and that's very structured, and that the vocabulary is easy. I totally agree with what you said earlier, Leroy, about Myers-Briggs. It's actually, I think it's a great tool, but a week later, when you ask somebody their acronym and they say that they're a TGIF or something like that, you know they didn't, you know they don't remember, and they don't remember the 30 other people, the 4-letter acronym for the 30 other people that they work with, and how an ENTJ interacts with an INSF, and it's just a lot. But having some simple vocabulary around the color code really helps a lot. Are those some of the things that you teach in your programs?
Yeah, well, and kind of back to, you know, featuring blues like we are today, making them feel appreciated is so very important. Even, you know, Leroy's been to space 4 times. I mean, he was the commander of the International Space Station. He speaks Mandarin. But he still needs to feel appreciated, that, you know, all the hard work. I grew up with 2 blue parents. They send a package for every holiday, including, you know, Flag Day. We'll show up. So, you know, that's been a huge thing, using the color code to help understand, you know, those teams, you know, our personal relationships, our professional relationships, of course, our kiddos as well.
Where would we be without the blues? If you look at the population, it's about 35% blue. And as Dr. Chow's talking about rationing food and being thoughtful about upcoming events that were special for somebody, and putting special food aside to make somebody's day, that's such a blue move. That's so amazing.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's what we do in our programs, is we use the color code so people can, you know, participants can understand a little more about themselves, but then they can also recognize the dominant colors in others that they're dealing with, and then adjust their communication style to be effective with that style, that color, you know. So yeah, I mean, understanding kind of the motivation of the person you're dealing with helps a great deal.
Perfect. Okay, let me get back to the chat here. So our participants, you know, we said, what is it like being in a dysfunctional team? Sandy said, other than family, which I thought was a great one. Tracy said, miserable. Lisa said, so very toxic and paralyzing, unmotivating. You know, so stressful, communication breakdowns all over. This is from Lori Holbrook. Lots of assumptions being made and nonverbals being incorrectly translated. It's rough, is what she's saying. Barbara said yes, and I found myself not caring anymore, just wanting to be done and do whatever it was the way the loudest person in the room wanted, right? The squeakiest wheel got the grease, in other words, right? Nothing bringing forward was dangerous, just not efficient. Somebody said yikes. So yeah, I mean, we have so many comments. I mean, I could go on and on. There's like a bunch of these comments here. But I guess the point is, like, working on a team that is dysfunctional and is not working the way that it could work, it's not reaching its potential, is very frustrating. So let's reverse the question now, and let's just ask, and this is what we did at Clemson, you know, again, how many of you have ever worked on a great team? A great team. How many of you worked on a great team where you just felt energized and excited about what you did? Tell us if you had that experience and what that was like, so maybe we can compare the two extremes, you know, because that's the gap that we're always looking to close for people is, you know, here you're frustrated, stressed out, you know, keep your head down. What I heard from some of these comments is people will do what they have to do, but that means they're giving the minimum required effort to get a paycheck, essentially, right? You know, they've got a job, they've got a paycheck, they're putting in the minimum required effort, and they're just surviving, they're just getting by. They're not thriving, they're not being collaborative, they're not creative, they're not communicating well, they're not really synergizing as a team. So what does that extreme other end look like? And so maybe while people are commenting here, let me come back to you, Dr. Chow. Have you been on a really great team in the past, and what have those experiences been like for you?
Yes, and what I found is that the quality of the team comes down to the leader, right? I mean, and so if you have a commander of a crew, the commander sets the culture and the tone for that crew. And I learned a lot of my leadership lessons from this one particular astronaut that I flew with on 2 shuttle missions, Colonel Brian Duffy. He was kind of a role model for me because he had you know, he was red, but he didn't have this, you know, like dominating driving style. He was red, but he had a very, you know, kind of gentle approach. And so I learned a lot from him, even though I'm a blue, but he was able to bring the team together, you know, and he didn't know about the color code, but he was very intuitive, and he could sense that he needed to kind of deal with different people in different ways, like we've been talking about. And he was able to kind of, you know, of course he had a hand in picking the team as well. And then he was able to bring us all together, even when there were some, you know, conflicts within the crew. He was able to kind of de-escalate and control all that. So it really is, it comes down to the leader being able to do that kind of thing, to understand the personalities and the colors, if you will, of the teammates, and then how to lead and mesh that all together.
And what was that experience like being on that team? Like, did you feel energized? Did you feel?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. Because, you know, I'd frankly been on another crew that was somewhat dysfunctional, and it had everything to do with the leader. And so, you know, not doing things like that. And so, yeah, it was a nice contrast to be on Brian's crew, and especially my 3rd shuttle mission. We just all clicked together, and it was just bang, 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 bang. And it was so easy, and we were so productive and so efficient.
Amazing. Okay, cool.
And I carried that into my own crew. I'd like to think as a commander, I was able to do the same thing with my crew.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic. Well, you know, and if you learn those lessons earlier in your career, right, again, even if you don't know the color code, right? You just
right. Yeah.
You just start to understand that, okay, I can't just do this my way all the time. I have to be able to bring in other people. And like you mentioned, you know, a red who is approachable. I always say, so we're talking about character development now, right? You know, we're talking about moving beyond your core color style and kind of expanding your capabilities. That's the program we call the Character Code. And we've got a super secret project that we're working on right now, actually, to help teams create incredible culture within their groups on a regular basis. But I can't really share too many details about that, but it's coming up soon. But the idea is, you know, if you're a red, but you're sociable and you're compassionate, you're kind of hard to beat, right? If you're a blue who, you know, motivated by intimacy, love to connect with other people, they have a lot of emotional depth. Sometimes blues can be emotionally intense. Sometimes blues can err on the side of being a little bit more judgmental. But what if you're able to, as a blue, maybe not default to an undesired emotional state and stay rational? Well, you're kind of hard to beat. Or you're a blue, but you're fun loving and you're sociable. That's pretty amazing. If you're a yellow like Jamie, who learned to be responsible, which is usually a red trait, you know, but now you've got this responsible yellow, kind of hard to beat. If you've got somebody with a white personality who's very objective but doesn't speak up a whole lot, but they learn how to be assertive, again, you know, that's where really people start to shine and really start to make a huge difference. Okay, so let me share some of these comments here. Oh my goodness. Okay, I lost my place a little bit, but there were some really great comments coming in about great teams. Where did they go? Oh, here we go. Okay, so Ella said, I'm in a very fun and exciting sales team. We're yellows and reds, and our white team leader binds the team very well together. Super cool. So you're kind of leveraging different gifts from different people. Cami said, working on a great team that felt comfortable to be me and and peaceful as well. And she said, laugh out loud, yes, I am a color code white. Lisa Dedinger said, yes, we operated like a well-oiled machine. It was fun and motivating for all of us. Sandy Logan, best team, working the customer service counter for UPS. That's super cool. Our small team had to support each other because the management didn't. I learned that one of our most important aspects of any job is your coworkers. Lisa Farrell said, the color code changed Jesse and my life for the better. When he found out that I'm a white and a processor, that one thing, that one idea, right, changed everything for our relationship. His primary color is blue. Gosh, yeah, lots of great comments. I most definitely have members just seem to focus. We had a lot of synchrony. I was the team lead, and it was great to have that level of excitement and motivation, and on and on. There's several great comments that are coming in. By the way, Dee Jones is saying, please come to my school. We need to improve our climate and culture. And I'm sure they'd love to have an astronaut come in. That'd be fun. So when you're operating on that higher level with a really great team, where people are working well together, they're utilizing their strengths in unison, right? And they're not getting hung up on limitations. That's where it gets exciting. That's where people are communicating, they're collaborating, they're sharing their discretionary efforts, right? They're willing to be they're willing to be collaborative, and they're up at night thinking about new ideas. They're not just putting in the minimum. They're giving their all. And that's really, I think, in my mind, the difference between a really great team and, you know, just a team that's just kind of getting by, or maybe even a dysfunctional team. Okay. Go ahead, Jake.
And we do another program. We've the last couple of years have developed a program on complacency, and in space and with NASA, they have a term called normalization of the deviance. And so, Leroy, can you talk just a little bit about that and what happens when that you know seeps into your organization?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, so it's not something we invented. It's a thing that's been around for a long time. Just humans, we're very good at adapting. So we adapt to our environment extremely well. And so when something weird happens or something anomalous happens and keeps happening, then we kind of make that our new normal, right? Everybody talks about this pandemic, you know, and adjusting to a new normal. Well, you're normalizing that deviance. So the deviance now becomes your new normal, if you will. And that can be very dangerous, especially in a flight environment, an aviation or a space flight environment, because when you start seeing things that aren't right, but then you get used to it because nothing bad happens, you start accepting that it's okay. And you can look at all three of the major disasters that NASA has suffered through: the Apollo 1 fire, you know, lost 3 astronauts, the Challenger accidents, lost 7, the Columbia accident, lost 7. You can trace all that back to normalization of the deviance, where some anomaly was observed, nothing bad happened, everybody kept studying, but we kept flying, and, you know, and then, you know, nothing bad happened until it did. And so then everybody resets and says, whoa, why did we accept that? And so, you know, sometimes it's okay. I mean, when you're in a tough situation and you need to adapt as a human, that's a gift to be able to adapt. But then at the same time, in an operational environment like spaceflight or aviation, you really want to avoid that.
So just a follow-up question to that, Dr. Chow, because I think that's fantastic. Maybe a personal question: where were you when the Challenger disaster happened? I remember that very vividly.
Oh yeah. No, I was in graduate school. I was earning my PhD at the time. I was in Santa Barbara, and it was morning that we saw the CNN was fairly new back then, but we saw the CNN feed and just couldn't believe it. It was just, you know, shocking. Yeah.
So you weren't part of NASA yet?
No, not yet.
Got it. Yeah. No, it was devastating, and it was just, I think as a nation, it was just so tragic. And I think everybody, it's one of those times in history that if you were there, you remembered, you know, you can remember that day very, very clearly. Okay, so I know we're a little bit over time. I'm just going to ask if there are any final questions. It's been such a pleasure having Leroy, Jamie, having you both here today. It's been a lot of fun. So any final questions that you want to get in, go ahead and ask now. I do have one from my son, Cruz. So Cruz, Cruz is my 11-year-old son. And when I told him that I was talking with the folks at OneOrbit today, and the fact that, you know, Dr. Chow has spent over, what is it,
229 days, yeah.
Crazy. So I told him, I'm like, Cruz, we're going to be interviewing Dr. Chow. He's an astronaut, 229 days in space. I said that earlier. I think like his brains like exploded out of the back of his 11-year-old mind. He was just like so excited, couldn't believe this. And the question, now he's yellow, so keep that in mind, right? He asked me 2 questions. He said, what was the coolest thing that he ever saw in space? And then the other question was, what's the funnest thing he ever did in space?
Well, you know, the coolest moment in space for me, I was on my 3rd mission. I was helping to build the space station. I was out on a spacewalk. So I was in a spacesuit. I had my boots attached to the robotic arm, and I was being moved from one part of the station to another part. And for several minutes, I was face down to the Earth, and I felt like a satellite flying over the Earth. I could see the continents roll by and the oceans, and it was kind of a surreal experience. So that was definitely the funnest or the coolest moment. I mean, the coolest moment. The funnest moment, I'm not sure if we really had fun moments. I mean, we always have fun playing with our food. In fact, it drives the public affairs people crazy. They say, well, people are going to think all you astronauts do up there is play with your food and throw food to each other, you know. But I mean, we do have some fun up there. We, you know, we have different ways to relax. We have DVD movies we can watch. We have, you know, ebooks we can read. And so, you know, probably the most satisfying is just a job well done to an astronaut, you know, certainly to a blue astronaut. But, you know, I can't, you know, I've been asked what's the funnest thing you've done before, and it's always a difficult one for me to answer. But the coolest one was definitely looking down at the Earth and feeling like a satellite flying over the Earth.
Blues sometimes have a hard time. I find the fun moments as they.
What about gymnastics on the station?
Gymnastics, yeah, we do gymnastics.
Really? Okay.
It's fun, sure. I mean, yeah, without gravity, it's pretty easy.
There you go. There you go. So this question is coming in from Jamie Sunkel. She's asking, did you ever tase anyone in space? It's kind of an odd question.
Did I ever tase anyone? No, we don't have a tase, but I guess we could make one.
Okay, now I'm just teasing Jamie with her taser fascination here.
I told you 20-year-olds, 24, you have no, you know,
Okay, no, I get it. Okay, Sandy Logan is asking, where can I go to take the color code test? Well, you can go to colorcode.com and you can take the test there, colorcode.com. That's pretty straightforward. Tracy said, wow, this was great. Oh, and she gave the link, that's very helpful of you, Tracy. Are you a blue as well? Very considerate. Let's see. How can we get more information about becoming a certified color code trainer? Well, thank you for asking that, Megan. You could go to colorcodecertification.com. I'm sure Allie can follow up with you as well. She's here. Okay, Cami said, do you have a psychologist that you touch base with on a regular basis while in flight to hash out differences? So in space, is there somebody at NASA maybe that you touch base with? The trained psychologist?
Yeah, so each long duration crew is assigned a NASA psychologist, and during training, the commander will have regular tag ups like every 3 months or so, you know, just to see if there are any issues, anything that needs to be worked out. And in flight, every few months, we also have the commander has a private conference with the psychologist to see if there's anything that needs to be talked about. And of course, if something comes up, the commander can always request a private conference with the psychologist. But, you know,
but only every few months.
Yeah, well, or as needed, and but you know, I never had any issues. We never had any issues, and I can't think of any time I've known anyone to have any issues. Astronauts are pretty driven and probably would not want to admit having any issues.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So, but you know, as an astronaut, you are part of the experiment, right? Like,
Yeah, sure, sure.
the experiment that's happening is in part a human experiment. And so I think that's a fascinating question about just kind of the psychology maybe of
Sure. Yeah.
those moments. Um, so let's see. Let me get a couple more here. Teresa said, "Do you have a Spanish website and test?" We don't have a Spanish website. You can get a copy of the assessment in Spanish. Maybe send an email to support@colorcodetraining.com, support@colorcodetraining.com, and we can put you in touch with a Spanish assessment. D. Jones said, "How do we sign up our school for the workshop?" That sounds like a Jamie question.
So for us, if you want to head over to our website, which is www.OneOrbitCDR.com, and actually I can type that in here. That's going to give you all the information on how to contact us and a lot more information about all of our programs and probably the quickest way to get a hold of us. So right now we're doing, of course, virtual programs. We're not sure what's going to happen with the schools in the fall, but we certainly prefer to do live programs. You know, I know, Jeremy, you're probably like us. It's a whole lot more impactful in person, but we have that virtual offering for all of our trainings and workshops.
Very cool. Okay, so we also have a directory of certified trainers on the Color Code website. Jamie, are you and Leroy listed up on the directory yet?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so Jamie just dropped the OneOrbitCDR.com URL there. You know, again, you can find Jamie in the directory at colorcode.com. That's another way to reach us.
Or LeroyChow.com too. So that's all. So Leroy's on the news a lot too. If you're looking for
LeroyChow.com. Okay, perfect. Okay, so maybe one final question. What if you could give one piece of advice to somebody looking to improve the nature, the quality, the character of their team? What advice would you give them?
well, I'll start. I think, you know, and this is, of course, you know, I learned from the training is that it's not about you, it's about them. And we call that the platinum rule. So we've always been taught growing up about the golden rule, of course, treat others how you want to be treated. And it's really should be treat others about how they need to be treated. And that responsibility falls on you and not them.
Perfect. I like that one. Dr. Chow?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier. And, you know, if you're the leader of the team, you know, you need to step up and understand the dynamics, understand the different kinds of people on your team and how to effectively communicate with them, and then how to encourage them to work together, right? And that can be a real challenge, right? I mean, sometimes, or a lot of times, you don't have a choice of who's working with you, and you as the leader have to make it work. And if you're not the leader, then of course it's more difficult. But maybe you can pull the leader aside and kind of help guide the leader a little bit, and hopefully get that team working better.
Wonderful. Yeah, you talked a little bit about controlling what you can and influencing where you can't.
Yes.
Control, which is fantastic. Okay, one last question coming in from Sandy. What are your favorite self-help books or authors or, oh, I lost it there. Self-help books, authors, or programs other than the Color Code?
Well,
the Color Code's number one, right?
Color Code's number one, but I love Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I actually found it before I found the Color Code, and it's my copy of it's highlighted and handwritten, and I go back to it all the time, especially times like this where it's easy to become demotivated. But that book is timeless. It's a classic, and I would encourage everyone to read Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
Fantastic. Great recommendation. Dr. Chow?
Well, I would have to agree, because Jamie, you know, got me to check that book out. It's a very thin book, very quick read, fascinating story, fascinating perspective, written a very long time ago. I think, Jamie, what, 1950s maybe, or maybe even earlier?
Yeah, late 40s.
Late 40s, yeah. And just, I mean, real quickly, Viktor Frankl was a concentration camp survivor from the war. His whole family was wiped out, and his perspectives are just pretty incredible and gives you a lot to think about and reflect on. And like Jamie says, it applies in a lot of situations, and especially the one we're in now. We're all in now. Gives you some perspective.
The delusion of reprieve is one of his that we think that we're going to be saved, and that's not how it works. So.
Right, and that has, and kind of like in the beginning of my talk about talking about don't set unrealistic or manage your expectations. Don't think that there's this artificial deadline. It's all going to be okay after this date.
Yeah, very, very appropriate for our times today, for sure. Well, you guys have been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a lot of fun for me. A lot of fun for me. I always enjoy chatting with you guys. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to do it. I love the interaction and the questions that we got here. Hopefully those who are participating live got some great insights from this as well. And hopefully we can do this again sometime soon.
All right. Well, thanks. It's been a pleasure. Goodbye, everyone. Hang in there. Good luck.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.